Can you all hear me? Perfect. Okay, thank you. Okay, wonderful. So thanks so much for tuning in. It's 2 o'clock here in Halifax. That's where I'm joining everyone from today. So we will get started. So I see a few of you mentioned where you were tuning in from, which is awesome. We're kind of all over the place here. A couple from Petawawa. Ontario's still getting snow. Okay, wonderful. So we'll get started. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just write them in the chat. I am able to see them while it's going on. In addition, I'll be turning off the webcam during the presentation just so that you have a bigger picture of the presentation. So my name is Victoria Stead, and I'm a health promotion specialist for CFB Halifax. I've been with the team since July of last year. And I am a registered dietitian by trade. So all of this nutrition information that I provide is right up my alley. Some of the information that I provided today is some stuff that I researched that I wasn't as familiar with. So it's quite interesting to see kind of the progression from the food guide and where it is today. So hopefully you learned some interesting tips just as I did when putting this together. So I will move right in. If you have any technical difficulties or you can't hear me for whatever reason, just write it in the chat, just so that I can be aware and try and fix it. Okay. Like I mentioned, Canada's Food Guide and what you need to know. So the first part of the presentation is going to speak to Canada's Food Guide throughout the years. So it's quite interesting to see where Canada's Food Guide started to where it is now and any of the messages that changed along the way. And then some pertinent information to what Canada's Food Guide and what Health Canada and registered dietitians are putting forward now. So we will get right into it. So before we do get started, though, I just want to share some points. So the presentation that you're about to view is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense. Any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. Some of the topics discussed in this webinar may be of sensitive nature and not appropriate for children. We ask for parental discretion. Please understand that people's stories are theirs alone to tell, and anything that is shared by participants in this webinar, either on camera or in the chat, is not to be discussed outside of the webinar. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on calfconnection.ca. Though active participation is encouraged, you can simply just follow along without using the chat or the video microphone functions if you prefer. So if you have to step out for any reason, or if you listen to this presentation and you thought, oh gosh, I know someone who could really benefit from listening to this, you can check out the CAF Connection website, and all of our presentations that have been ongoing for the last 3 weeks will be posted on there. So first thing I want to talk about is healthy eating. So if anyone wants to write in the chat, if anyone feels like engaging a little bit, how would you define healthy eating? And how would you define healthy food? So when you hear healthy eating, what does that mean to you? Portioning, absolutely, yep. Sustainable diet. Something that has less trans fats, absolutely. Less sugar and fat. Fruits, vegetables, perfect. Fresh or frozen, absolutely. Plant-based eating, not highly processed food and sugar, correct balance, perfect. Wonderful. That's great. So all around a really balanced diet. So we'll move into that here throughout the presentation. But to define healthy eating, it means that we're eating a variety of foods that's giving you the nutrients that you need to maintain your health. Also, healthy food or healthy eating is also going to make you feel good and provide you with energy. Any of the nutrients in the food that we consume include protein, carbohydrates, fat, water, vitamins, and minerals. So all of these are different aspects of nutrition called macronutrients and micronutrients. This presentation isn't going to dive into that side of nutrition, but we do have some really great webinars coming up and some that have happened in the past as well that are pre-recorded that you can tune into if you want to know a little bit more about the breakdown in nutrition. But essentially, healthy eating is just the variety of foods that you're eating that's providing your body with the fuel that it needs. So nutrition is, of course, important for everyone. It's also really great when paired with being physically active and maintaining a healthy weight. Eating well is an excellent way to help your body stay strong and healthy. So now if we think about healthy food, a lot of foods are categorized as, I'm doing little air quotations here, as healthy. But what actually means that something is considered a healthy food is a type of food that is high in the nutrients that we need. So especially if it's high in fiber, natural sources of vitamins, these types of healthy food are linked to a decreasing risk of developing high cholesterol, reduces your risk for cardiovascular disease and your risk of stroke, helps to control your blood sugars, halts the progression of osteoporosis, and reduces the risk of some infections and cancer. So all of the food that we eat contributes a great amount of nutrition towards our overall health. So healthy eating and healthy food, really the goal is to consume more foods that are nutrient dense. So more foods that have more nutrition that's going to provide our bodies with the fuel and energy that it needs. So yeah, so that's kind of that in a nutshell, kind of the overview of what healthy eating is and where Canada's Food Guide moved into the definition of healthy eating. So I wanted to take some time to go through Canada's Food Guide through the years. So food guides are basic education tools that are designed to help us follow a healthy diet. They embody sophisticated dietary analysis and merge national nutrition goals, data from food consumption surveys, and issues of food supply and production. They translate the science of nutrient requirements into a practical pattern of food choices, incorporating variety and flexibility. Now, Canada's Food Guide, and most of us have been around to likely see a few renditions of the food guide. It has been revised many times, but it's really never strayed from the original purpose of guiding food selection and the promotional of nutritional health. So our first food guide is from 1942. So if we look at this food guide, that's kind of what the picture was, and nothing colorful, nothing super exciting about it, but it's quite interesting when it came out and how it was developed. So in 1942, this food guide acknowledged wartime food rationing, while also aiming to prevent nutritional deficiencies and to improve the overall health of Canadians. A statement that was on the official food rules, which is what this was considered, was Canada at war cannot afford to ignore the power that is obtainable by eating the right foods. So through food consumption surveys, which were of course limited at the time, it revealed that there was problems with access to food, insufficient money for food, and malnutrition in many of the Canadian population. Thus, the official food rules were intended to be a focal point for a wartime nutrition program to improve the health of Canadians by maximizing nutrition in context of food rationing and poverty. So within this Canada's official food rules, you can see that there were 6 different categories, quite different than what we see today. We have a category of milk, fruits and vegetables, which are separated in this food guide. An interesting category that I noticed was the category of cereals and bread, meat and fish in their own category, speaking mostly to liver, heart, or kidney, and consuming eggs. And if you also see at the bottom, it speaks to vitamin D, which was of concern, deficiency of vitamin D, which was of concern in that time frame. There's also some information that we'll go through that talks about different supplements to put in with your food, whereas now we focus on if you consume the correct amount of nutrients, you're likely to be able to not get deficient in different nutrients. So during the time of the 1942 of Canada's official food rules, a series of 10 leaflets were actually inserted into weekly pay envelopes. These topics covered in these leaflets were breakfast, lunch, and the role of healthy eating. So I found that quite interesting that these little pamphlets or leaflets were actually put into people's pay stubs. So 2 years later, in 1944, they removed the term official. So it's now considered, or was considered, Canada's food rules. It was recognized that Canadians were not meeting riboflavin requirement, which is a B vitamin, which is necessary for cell growth and function. The rules then began advocating for the consumption of a greater quantity of milk. So during this time, the food groups began to shift to what we know today, such as cheese and eggs were incorporated into the meat and fish group based on their protein content. This guide in 1944 also spoke about famine by indicating food is urgently needed in Europe and the Far East. Do your bit for hungry humanity by conserving food. Buy less, use less, waste nothing. So flash forward quite a few years to 1977. This food guide sparked a whole lot of interest. For the first time, it included colorful pictures of food, which were guided in a wheel-like fashion around a sun graphic. Where the sun graphic came from, I'm not entirely sure, but that's yet to be determined. There were now 4 food groups as opposed to the last one having 6. Fruits and vegetables were combined since their nutrient contributions overlapped, which is, again, what we see in today's food guide. Ranges were added to serving suggestions, showing the flexible nature of the guide. And then also the metric units made their way into the serving size suggestions as we were moving into the metric unit here in Canada. At this time also, milk became milk and milk products, which made its way for the inclusion of other dairy choices. Michael, you remember that one in middle school? Cool, that's awesome. Thanks for pointing that out. Bread and cereals group established that enriched products could be used in place of whole grain. So enriched meaning that there's added nutrients into a type of food that we consume. So after the implementation of this food guide, it also came with a Canada's Food Guide Handbook, which is considered to be a nutrition education milestone. So the handbook explained the concepts underlying the guide, illustrated examples, and discussed nutrient functions. So paired with this food guide also provided consumers with information on how it was developed and different functions of nutrients so that consumers can understand, okay, great, you're recommending this food for me, but what does it truly do for my body? So this was quite a big milestone. Then we have a rendition that's very much the same, but if you kind of look, just the colors have adapted slightly, and there's a few different meanings as well. So this was 7 years later. There was a 1982 edition with Health Canada advising the government to take action to prevent diet-related chronic diseases. So in the past food guides, it was never noted that your diet could necessarily contribute to diet-related diseases. So diabetes, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, high lipid profile. So it was starting to be recognized in the 1980s that this was of a concern within Canada. So 2 significant modifications came out of this food guide. So the emphasis was on eating a variety of food, of course, which was happening in the past food guides as well. But there was expanded messaging on energy balance. So when we talk about energy balance, and you can see it right up at the top there, we're talking about what you consume. So balancing the energy intake that you consume with the energy output. So now we're talking about when you consume food, consume the amount that you need that's equivalent to how much exercise or physical activity you complete within the day. On the surface, of course, the changes appeared to be minor, like I said, just a few different colors, but they signified a major shift in dietary advice. So the previous food guide goals of preventing nutrient deficiencies were now being integrated with the goal of reducing chronic disease. In particular, this food guide was encouraging Canadians to limit fat, sugar, salt, and alcohol, and was an attempt to curb the rising rate of diet-related chronic diseases by influencing eating habits. So this, in 1980s, this is when we really started shifting into the food guide that we see today. Now, 1992, so 10 years later, marked a new era in nutrition guidance in Canada. Most of us may remember this one because the one after that didn't come out until 2007. So going, for me, being 27, this food guide would have been shown to me in elementary school. So this one is kind of, when I picture the food guide, that's kind of the first one that my mind goes to. So the title was changed to Food Guide versus what it was previously, the Food Rules, and it became Canada's Food Guide to Healthy Eating. The biggest change in this food guide was the shift in the philosophy, in that the guide embraced a total diet approach to choosing foods. Previous guides, as we reviewed, were based on a foundation diet concept. So it identified the minimum requirements that we would need. The total diet approach aimed to meet both energy and nutrient requirements. This version came with really large ranges in the number of servings from the 4 food groups for energy needs for your different ages, body sizes, activity levels, genders, and conditions such as pregnancy and nursing, none of which were involved in the previous food guides. The guide also introduced the others category, which we still know today, which are the foods and beverages that didn't fit into any of the 4 food groups. So what would we think would fit into the others category? Things that we consume but may not be recommended by Canada. Sweets, cookies, cakes, all that kind of good stuff, right? That we still consume, is all a part of a balanced diet, but didn't fit into the other 4 categories, so then was given its own as an other. 2007 is the food guide that we would have followed along for quite some time up until the new rendition. So these revisions updated the nutrient reference values for healthy populations. So if anyone's familiar with the dietary reference intake report, so this is a report that you can look up within Canada that shows what the recommended nutrient intake is for healthy populations. So that's kind of what this is developed from. This food guide also spoke to the rising rates of nutrition-related chronic illness and an evolving food supply and the ever-changing environment that affects the lifestyles of Canadians and their food choices. So if we think about the food guide from 1942 up until 2007, the way that Canada had changed and evolved, we were past the war times. Processed foods are now more readily available. Fast foods are on every corner. So this is really a focus on reducing chronic disease that's within our country. So the new structure and the design moves the vegetables and fruit food group positioned at the most prominent arc of the rainbow design. So right at the top of the food guide, you have vegetables and fruit. So being the most prominent, as it provides the most nutrients that you need within. It's also the highest amount of food that you need comes from the vegetables and fruit category, so it's more prominent at the top. It included more guidance on the quality of food choices and focuses again on a risk reduction for chronic illness and obesity. Milk products changed to milk and alternatives, which acknowledged other food sources of calcium, such as fortified soy beverages for non-milk drinkers, or this could be your almond beverages or whatever you choose. Contained guidance on the amounts of fats and oils to consume. So this was something that wasn't put forward in the other food guides. So this one spoke to adding oils to your food for flavor and for cooking. And it encouraged the reduction in trans fats, which I believe someone had spoken to earlier about healthy eating, and the replacement of saturated fat with unsaturated fats, and encourages regular physical activity as a benefit along with eating well. So now to move into the present food guide. So this food guide has a whole new look. It just came out in 2019. Is anyone not familiar with this food guide? Has anyone not seen it? We're all familiar. Bill? Okay, perfect. So hopefully this will provide you with some great information on kind of where Canada's going. So if you look at this food guide and compare it to the other photos that we just went through, it is significantly different. Other countries within the world do follow a plate-based model. So we did adapt it based on other country models and how well their food guides have progressed. So this one here, of course, has a whole new look. It's a huge departure from the 4 food groups that we grew up knowing. So this guide emphasizes quite a few different changes. So it emphasizes getting protein from plant-based sources, such as beans, lentils, and nuts, rather than always choosing animal-based foods, such as milk, meat, and poultry, which are indeed, of course, still a part of the guide. We still encourage meat and poultry, but just making sure that you're choosing plant-based proteins as well. Only whole grains are emphasized rather than refined grains or enriched grains. So those being your white bread, pasta, cereals, and rice. And it also advises, of course, to cut back on sugar, which focuses on water as your choice of drink. So the only guideline you really need from this food guide is the snapshot plate model, which is shown here on the slide. It shows your portions of protein, whole grains, vegetables, and fruit. So half your plate being your vegetables and fruit, a quarter being your protein, and a quarter being your whole grain foods, so your carbs. The shift with this food guide focuses on other aspects of healthy eating aside from the food that we eat. So I usually get questions when I talk about this food guide about what servings should I have. It's not realistic for me to have 15 different types of fruits and vegetables on my plate. Well, of course, that's not what we're looking for. We just want to make sure that we're having a colorful plate, and that generally when you look down at your plate for supper or lunch or breakfast, that you make sure that you have the majority being fruits and vegetables, and then a quarter of that, of course, being your protein-based, and then a quarter being your whole grain. So really just trying to visualize what your plate should look like. But more aspects within this food guide is not just focused on the choices of food that you consume, but also many other aspects as well. So healthy eating isn't just about food. So we're going to go through some guidelines that help assist with healthy eating that's represented in the new food guide. Is the potato a vegetable now? So potatoes are a vegetable, but they don't really count towards your vegetable intake just because of its high starch content. So I would more so consider potato as being a starch. So if you think about on your plate, your vegetables could be, if we go back, your vegetables could be kind of your broccoli, your carrots, squash, peas, all that kind of good stuff. And then when it says choose whole grain foods, that's where you can implement your potato as your starch, or as your carbohydrate rather. So the foundation of healthy eating. So Health Canada recommends the regular intake of nutritious foods, of course. So that would be our vegetables, our fruits, whole grains, and protein foods. These are commonly found in the patterns of eating linked with beneficial effects on health. These patterns have shown to have protective effect in reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. So to kind of put a statistic in there as to why one of our focuses, of course, or why we really focus on cardiovascular disease when we're talking about diseases affected by nutrition, is that in Canada, almost 50% of the deaths from cardiovascular disease in 2017 were attributed to dietary risks. So we know that the food that you eat can significantly impact your heart health. So this is a big push that we're putting on for consuming a diet that's heart healthy. So the regular intake of plant-based foods is recommended, as this pattern of eating typically results in a higher intake of dietary fiber. So for instance, a plant-based food could be like legumes and lentils, so quinoa or chickpeas. So these types of foods are higher in dietary fiber, which is associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular disease, colon cancer, and type 2 diabetes. These types of plant-based foods are also, could of course be considered your vegetables and fruits, which again lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. Consuming nuts, which have protein in it as well. This is associated with decreasing your bad LDL cholesterol. So LDL is lousy, we like to call it. So LDL, lousy cholesterol, so that's your bad cholesterol. So nuts will decrease that bad cholesterol. Same goes for soy protein. This will also decrease your bad cholesterol. So soy protein, like your tofu. Water, of course, should be your beverage of choice to support health and promote hydration without adding calories to the diet. So water, of course, our body is mostly made up of water, as we know. It's also essential for metabolic and digestive processes. So your water intake can also be contributed from the foods you eat. So you do still get water, not necessarily from drinking a glass of water, but there is water available in foods we eat, like our fruit, our vegetables, and of course our soups. Also speaking about different types of fruits and vegetables, frozen, canned, and dry foods are always convenient options, and they are just as nutritious. These are a really great option when fresh food is out of season. Maybe it's super costly because it's, again, out of season, or it's unavailable or takes too long to prepare. So we always like to make mention that fresh, when it comes to fruits and vegetables, is not always best. Sometimes it, of course, can be more expensive or maybe not available. So fresh, frozen, and canned will all provide you with the same nutrient profile. For instance, your frozen fruits and vegetables are flash frozen once they're harvested, which locks in those nutrients. Same with canned as well. The only exception with canned would be if there's added sodium or added salt into it. That wouldn't make it as nutritious. So if you are choosing a canned vegetable choice, making sure you're choosing one that has no added sodium. So for anyone who has seen the handout for Canada's Food Guide, which is available on the Health Canada website, it talks about 4 different sections where, again, healthy eating isn't all about food. So one aspect, one of the 4 aspects within Canada's Food Guide is, aside from consuming healthy food, you also want to be mindful of your eating habits. So you want to create a healthy eating environment. So what this means is your eating environment, it can change based on where you live, where you learn, where you work, and where you play. So you want to focus your attention on eating and your eating environment all around. So regardless of where you are eating, whether we're at our desk at work or whether we're sitting at home enjoying a meal with our loved ones during this time, you really want to make your surroundings, you really want to make a positive surrounding around you. So you don't want to be sitting in front of the TV. You don't want to be eating just for the sake of eating. You want to use your senses to really enjoy the food. So what does it smell like? Making sure it's colorful so that it's appealing. It tastes good by adding different seasonings such as herbs or spices. And then also think about, I want you to kind of think about the last meal that you had. So for me, I'm not a super great example in this sense. If I think about the last meal I had, it was breakfast, and I ate it while I was working. One thing I like to really point out is to really take the time again to eat your food and try and step away from anything that you're doing that's not focusing on the food. So don't eat your, eat your peanut butter toast and apple while you're watching TV or while you're doing work. Make sure you take the time to thoroughly just enjoy that food that you're consuming. So next, of course, we want to talk about cooking more often. So Health Canada recommends cooking and preparing healthy meals and snacks using nutritious foods as a practical way to support healthy eating. So cooking and preparing your food at home can, of course, support this healthy eating because when it's prepared, you're less likely to add in highly processed products. So you're usually choosing foods that are fresh and nutritious. You're the one who's able to put in the type of oil that you're putting in your food, the type of seasonings, reducing the amount of salt that's put into your food. Whereas if we think about when we go to a restaurant, even if it's a 5-star restaurant, all of the food always tastes super great. And that's likely due to the fact that there's added fat and lots of salt in there to be able to flavor it more. So at least at home, we have the option to control what is being put into our food. So by cooking, we can change our behaviors. So it can take some time if you're not someone who usually cooks or makes homemade meals kind of from scratch. You can get into the habit of doing this, and this will create a new behavior for you. So you will then develop a behavior where this is something that you enjoy doing, and this is something that you want to continue doing, which can promote improvements to the types and the amounts of food that you consume over time. So generally, again, a rule of thumb, when we cook at home, we're going to be using ingredients that are, of course, lower in sodium, lower in sugar, and lower in saturated fat. So when you cook at home, you're aware of what you're putting in your food. Enjoying your food, of course. So that's kind of similar to the being mindful of your eating habits, but enjoying your food, we really want to taste the flavors that are within the food. So thoroughly using all of the senses that you have to get the most out of your food. Being open to trying new foods. So trying not to be too picky about what you're eating, try new things so that you can have quite a balanced diet. Develop a healthy attitude about food. Socializing at mealtime. I know this can be a challenging thing right now where we're kind of stuck with whoever lives in our house. But there is, of course, ways around that by doing FaceTime or the new app House Party or Zoom meetings. Just trying to socialize and not being alone while you're eating. Enjoy your shopping for food. Definitely not as fun now as it used to be. If anyone ever used to find that fun, I'm not sure. But maybe next time when we do have the opportunity now to go to the grocery store where we're not practicing social isolation or social distancing rather, actually enjoying spending time looking at fresh food. Growing or harvesting your own food. Does anyone here have a garden or plant your own fruits and vegetables? Yeah, looking into it. Wonderful. What are some things that we grow at home? Oh, an arrow garden. Awesome. I know here in my house right beside me, we have lots of herbs because herbs are super great with seasoning your food, and they're considered kind of free and calorie wise. Tomatoes, awesome. I'm also growing sugar snap peas, which have really taken off. Tomatoes, cukes, peppers, beginning onions, tomatoes, and cantaloupe. That's awesome. Wonderful. Yeah, so this is, despite being kind of stuck in this self-isolation and in our home, this is a really great opportunity to be able to, as Christina said, trial and error. Beets, carrots, squash, awesome. So this is a great opportunity to be able to dive in a little bit further because we have more time on our hands to be able to really spend time planting some seeds. I know there's nothing more exciting, at least in my household right now, when some of the sprouts start coming up because you know that you're kind of successful. And this is coming from me. I don't have much of a green thumb. Okay, so growing and harvesting your own food, of course. My goal for this year is to have turkey dinner using all of my own vegetables coming out of my garden. So that's something I'm looking forward. That's kind of the SMART goal that I've set for this year. Okay, I usually dry my herbs and use them. Do the nutrients die if dried? No, they don't. So as long as you're drying them properly, so following, there's different ways and techniques to dry. My understanding is to dry different herbs. So making sure that you're following the directions for that specific herb. Yeah, but no, it won't take away from the nutrients. Some I believe, trying to think now. I believe oregano may lose a bit of its nutrient content when it's dried, but for the majority, likely you're perfectly fine drying them and you'll still get the same nutrient content. And then, of course, are herbs good cooked fresh? Absolutely. Yeah. Depends on kind of what you want to add it into. Powdered herbs, yep, same thing. So these are the things that are more readily available. So if we think about when we go into the grocery store, how we don't always have, at least here in Nova Scotia, we don't always have the herbs available that we want to consume. It's super great that we have the option to use dried herbs, which are still going to provide a very similar flavor profile as what you would with fresh. So if fresh is available, it's always super, super great to be able to use that just to be able to utilize the fact that it's available fresh in your region. But generally, dried herbs and spices are less expensive, which is super beneficial for many of us, and they're more readily available. Do we need to be worried about mineral variety if we grow all of our food? Michael, do you want to expand on that a little bit more? Just so that I understand kind of a little bit more of what you're asking. Okay, we'll carry on just for now, and then I'll see Michael. I'll chat with you in a bit just to answer that question. So eating meals with others. So again, during this quarantine, it can be quite difficult to eat meals with others aside from those who live in your households. But in general, when we think about Canada's Food Guide, when all of this is done and over in the next few months, hopefully, making sure that we're sharing our meals with others. So enjoying the quality time that you have together to sit down and eat your meal. Sharing different food traditions that you have across generations and cultures. So if you have traditions, for instance, if you think about Easter, some of us may have other traditions that we follow. Unfortunately, we may not have been able to have done that this year, but thinking about other holidays and events that may be coming up, just making sure that these traditions continue to go forward. Exploring new healthy foods that you may not normally try. So going to the grocery store or adding a food into your cart for your curbside pickup that generally you wouldn't consume, just to give it a try to see if it's something that you'd like to incorporate into your diet. I know some veggies grown in some areas lack certain minerals. Is it a concern with the garden? Michael, I would say no, just because generally when you're growing your own food, the soils and the fertilizers that you'd be using to grow those nutrients or to grow those herbs would be just as well as those that you would get kind of in the grocery store, if that makes sense. I know some soils, I know here where I live, the soil's quite muddy, so things don't grow as well. So they might be smaller or just not grow at all. So really it just depends on what region you're in. But I wouldn't be concerned. I think it's really awesome and super beneficial if you grow your own veggies because you know exactly where they came from, you know how fresh they are. As for lacking certain minerals, I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. No problem. Okay, so different tips for eating healthy. So change your shopping habits. Oh, great. Okay, so vegetable skin, fruit skin like orange peels, eggshells, coffee, and tea used are amazing for the soil. So I'm really glad you brought that up actually because I have a ton of coffee grinds that my husband and I were trying to figure out what we should do with it, whether we should just throw it into the green bin or what. So I was wondering if that's something that would be beneficial for our garden. So thanks so much for sharing that. Would a greenhouse help with veggie and herb garden? So greenhouse helping with the veggie and herbs grow, you mean, Joseph? I personally don't have Yeah, I personally don't have a greenhouse at my home. Um, my neighbor does, and someone else can pipe in as well if you have a greenhouse. But my neighbor's herb garden is growing just as well as mine. What I do actually is I have some heating mats that I just bought at Home Hardware that I put underneath all of my pots for my seedlings, and then I also have an LED plant light that I got off Amazon, and I keep it, of course, in front of a window. And then I also have a fan that's blowing on it that kind of mimics what it would be like in the outdoors with the wind. And that seems to be working perfectly fine for me. I'd love to have a greenhouse or something that I could kind of have all year long. So maybe that's something I might look into. Does anyone in this chat have a greenhouse? Greenhouse or cold frame box is good for extending the season in colder areas like Winnipeg. Awesome. Wonderful. So then you'd be able to grow your herbs and different vegetables and stuff all year long. Whereas for me here in Nova Scotia, I don't have a greenhouse. So really, we only have our herbs and vegetables during the summer, unfortunately. That's great. Wonderful. So it seems like a lot of us are really interested in growing our own food, which is great. Most herbs can grow indoors, absolutely. Okay, so if you want to grow fruits like tomatoes or pepper year-round, you'll need a fairly powerful supplementary light. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. These are great tips. I really, again, don't have a green thumb, so this is really awesome to be able to hear from some of you who know a little bit more about it than I do. Wonderful. Okay. So eating healthy tips. So we think about changing your shopping habits. So one thing that I usually struggle with is maybe there's something that I want to make for supper. So once I get off work, generally when I am going to and from the office, I'll get off work and I'll go to the grocery store after work if I hadn't meal planned for that week. Generally during that time between 4:30 and 5, I'm quite hungry. And this is a terrible time to shop because this is when you're going to choose everything from good to bad to put in your cart. So really trying to change your shopping habits so that you don't shop when you're hungry. And this comes down to meal planning and preparing what you're going to consume for the week. There's quite a few great presentations that have been done and will be done on meal planning if you want to tune into those based on what you have at your house and how you can meal plan to be able to save money, avoid having to go to the grocery store, all of that kind of great stuff. Changing your shopping habits as well. It's super great to make a grocery list. So making sure that you write down everything that you need on the list prior to going to the grocery store. This, of course, is going to help us from deterring and going and buying something that we actually don't need, and also helps us keep on track so that we do get everything that we do need without having to go back to the store because we forgot. Watching your portion sizes. So one thing is trying not to serve second. So filling your plate. A smaller plate is actually what we're encouraging now is filling a smaller plate, because you will only put on that plate how much food will fit onto it. So you won't overfill it versus if you have a ginormous plate to fill up. Also try not to serve second. So being satisfied with the food that you have. Eating at a slower pace, putting down your fork while you're eating, or your fork or spoon or knife or whatever while you're eating. So that gives you time to chew and to eat and will help with your hunger cues. I make leftovers for lunch. That's wonderful. Yes, it's really great when you're preparing supper to make extras to have for lunch the next day. And I know personally I'm really terrible for that, just because I don't like to eat the same thing that I had for supper for lunch the next day. I just kind of get bored of it. So what I'll do is we might make, so for tonight we're making pulled pork tacos. So tomorrow I'll maybe make a pulled pork burrito bowl. So it's a little bit different, but still utilizing those leftovers. Changing the way that you prepare your food. So cutting back on added fats or oils and cooking your spread or cookings or spreads. So The oils that we add to our food, I usually like to recommend if you're cooking something to put on a nice olive oil or avocado oil, something that's considered one of the healthy fats, as opposed to throwing in butter and everything. Butter, of course, is perfectly fine, but just making sure that you're using it in small amounts. Sorry. When you're cooking your food, you want to grill, steam, or bake it. So you want to avoid frying it. Of course, avoid deep frying it. There is a time and place for those types of foods as well, though. Again, encouraging a balanced diet. Sometimes they might want to have fried food, and that's perfectly fine. Serving whole grains, so making sure that you're taking the time, or rather purchasing whole grain foods. So if you're someone who has rice often, making sure that you're going for that whole grain rice versus that white rice. It's going to provide better nutrients, higher in fiber, and also a ton more vitamins and minerals. So Joseph, what about active fryers? So I actually have a Tefal, and it is really awesome. So I'll cut up my potatoes for French fries, and I just throw in a bit of olive oil, and it's perfectly great. Yeah, awesome. We all have tons of air fryers. It's so great. Okay, make your foods flavorful with herbs and spices. So the herbs and spices that we were talking about earlier, those are free essentially. So there's no calories associated with adding herbs and spices. You can add so much flavor to your food with herbs and spices, and it also adds a huge nutritional variety. Every herb and spice has its own nutritional profile that contributes to an overall healthy diet. So really throwing in herbs and spices to flavor your food. Extra virgin olive oil, awesome. Yep, that's a staple in my house. Another staple for me is avocado oil. It actually has a higher smoke point, and I do like the taste of it. And then, of course, change your eating habits. You want to make sure that you're keeping on a regular eating schedule. So something that I know a lot of us have been struggling with since being at home is making sure that you're still waking up at the same time, having breakfast, lunch, and supper all at the same time. I know for me, the first couple weeks not going into work was a big struggle, but now I'm really trying to get into that routine of having my meals at the same time every day, as I would previously and as I will when things get back to normal. So that was the end of our presentation. Being in the field is hard, absolutely. I can only imagine. So that puts the end of our presentation. I just want to touch base on some available resources that we have available for CAF members and their families. So we have the Canadian Forces Member Assistance Program, Canada's Suicide Hotline, any information that you need on COVID-19. We're all probably quite familiar with this website now. Family Information Line, Sexual Misconduct Response Center, the SMRC, Kids Help Phone, and the ARC line in support of COVID-19. So these are all really great available resources that's available for you and your family in any time of need. Wonderful. So thanks so much for tuning in. All these questions were really great. I learned a whole bunch. I'm a dietitian, but definitely not an expert in everything. So putting together these presentations are great, and hearing wonderful questions and suggestions from all of you is wonderful as well. So if you have any questions, let me know. You can also rewatch this webinar, and then of course, stay tuned for other ones. Halifax is doing this as a 3-part series. So I was doing this week's, and then my colleagues will do the next 2 weeks. So yeah, I look forward to talking to you all again soon. Thanks so much. Oh, Nancy, how do you feel with regards to extra virgin olive oil versus coconut oil? That's a wonderful question, Nancy. So coconut oil was a type of food, kind of a superfood that was really spoken about a couple years ago, and saying that it was kind of the cure-all for a lot of different things. But it's since come out with more research coming out. And if you think about some of our presentations, actually, Nancy, you may want to go back and take a look, but they spoke about the different forms of fat and how it affects your body. So extra virgin olive oil is considered a healthy fat, which is an unsaturated fat. Same with avocado oil, canola oil. Those are all considered healthy fats. Coconut oil is mostly made up of saturated fat, which is considered a fat that we really want to try and eliminate or reduce in our diet. So there's a time for coconut oil and other saturated fats like our butters and margarines. But I would recommend trying to usually aim towards extra virgin olive oil or an oil of that type versus always using coconut just because of its fat content. Coconut oil is great in some dishes because it adds a super great flavor. But again, trying to stick to the unsaturated fats. If you just do a quick Google search on fat profile of oils, you'll get a really good diagram of the types of oils that are best for you and the types of oils that you should only use in moderation. If baking is asking for coconut oil, what should I replace it with? So often if baking is asking for coconut oil, they may be doing it because of the flavor profile. So that's perfectly fine if you want to use it in baking. If you want to avoid using it entirely, then you can really replace it with any type of oil. But based on that recipe, they may be suggesting coconut oil specific to that. It's perfectly fine to consume it in a balanced diet. Yeah, many still do use coconut oil very often. And again, nothing too wrong with using it within moderation, but not using it in everything. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to one of us in health promotion, and we're more than happy to help you.